Hey y'all, how you doing? Thanks for joining me again here on Learning with Lear. My name is Ryan Verdon. I'm the founder and director of Lear Cultural Coaching. You can check out more about me, about Lear, by visiting the website. Link is down there in the description. Today I want to talk about one of the things that's come up as I have launched this series and as I've been talking more publicly about where I think our anti-racism is at and where the state of racial justice is at. And it's this idea that I am challenging whiteness being framed as a privilege. And I want to be clear that there was a time in my life where that framework would have elicited defensiveness from me. It would have made me ask questions. And so I want to start the conversation by talking a little bit about why I think that happens. And I think that happens because, again, of our limited vocabulary and our limited framework for understanding. So as it currently exists, if you're anti-racist, if you're concerned about racism and you are trying to be a force for good for ending racism, the language we have to talk about that is one that's steeped in privileged discourse. What I mean by that is that you often begin your understandings, you begin this journey by pointing out the benefits and advantages that come to people who look like me, to people who have white skin and who are perceived as white and legally classified as white. That's an important distinction. Um, but that's where it starts, right? And so the language is being filtered through that framework right away. Then that's compounded by the fact that anybody who's questioning whether whiteness is a privilege um, is on the right, is actually saying actually white privilege isn't even real, that there are no benefits to being white. As a matter of fact, you should embrace whiteness as an identity, and embrace white nationalism. And so anybody who's concerned about racial justice is going to avoid that, right? That makes sense. They're going to avoid that and move in this direction. But this direction, again, the only language that we have to talk about our worldview is being filtered through a lens of understanding whiteness as a privileged identity. Um, and I think that that's problematic for a couple reasons. One is there's nothing about being white that is beneficial to our souls, to us as human beings. The entire identity exists to separate white people from other human beings, right? I don't want to get into the history lesson, but that's the entire purpose, is to separate white folks from others so that they don't come together and pose a threat to the elite. When it first comes on the scene, that elite were the landowning aristocrats in Virginia, right? And so something that has that origin, and has that purpose, is not something that can produce justice, right? David Roediger says it's not just that whiteness is false and fraudulent, it's that it's only false and fraudulent, right? I would actually go further than that even. I would say whiteness is a violence. I think you can look at history and see the violence that's been done in the name of white supremacy and whiteness. But I think we skip the a very important piece of violence that's connected to whiteness, which is the violence it does to us, those of us considered white, who are told we are white, and therefore we must believe certain things. We must look at the world a certain way, and that looking at the world, those things we have to believe are all very, very poisonous to us. They serve to disconnect us from creation. They serve to disconnect us from community, and they serve to disconnect us from ourselves. Um, and so for that reason, I think it is extremely problematic to say whiteness is a privileged identity. And if we think about it, I believe words have meaning, right? And so the term privilege means that it is something good. It connotates something good. Um, and whiteness isn't good. Now, I want to be clear. That doesn't mean that having white skin isn't good, right? My ancestry is Irish. There are German folks, there are English folks, there are French folks, Italian folks, Hungarian folks, Polish folks, who all we would now consider white, but whiteness isn't their culture. right? Their culture, their ethnic identity is more tied to their culture than being white is, unless they came here to America where they learned how to be white. And where they learned how to be white here is to hate people of color, is to accept violence against particularly black folks, and the dehumanization of anybody who's not considered white. That is not a privileged place to be. That's a sick place to be. And so it's incumbent upon us, those of us who move in the world as white and are perceived as white and have whiteness projected onto us, prescribed onto us, to understand that we can't just say we're not white, right? Also, we have to understand, I'm also not saying that there's not benefits, that this system, this society doesn't benefit me moving through the world looking like this. It does. What I'm saying is we have to understand those benefits as ultimately not being enough. Our souls are worth more than that, right? and and truth be told, much of that is just basic human decency. We it's not a privilege to be treated as a human, right? Um and even some of the privileges that do come to white folks are actually not privileges, because my people, we can be better. We're out here being hella mediocre, and we should be better. And whiteness often keeps us from healing because we're told we're supposed to be the shit, and then we're dealing with things that human beings deal with, and we don't go get help, and we don't go heal, and so we end up inflicting even more harm and being more terrible, and feeling more crappy, and it just never ends. And so again, whiteness is not a privilege to us as human beings. We have to be the ones to accept that. We have to be the ones to say, hey, this identity you want me to align with, it's a no-go for me. It's a non-starter. And I'm not saying that's going to come easy, because right now we don't have a language. There's nothing else, right? And so I'm not suggesting that I'm going to walk out in the world and say, yo, I'm not white. No, I'm definitely going to say that. I got to own that. I got to be clear about how I move in the world. But what I don't have to do is accept the way that whiteness wants me to view the world and to view myself. I can unlearn that. I can begin the really, really spiritual and deeply personal work of healing from whiteness internally. And then that's going to allow me to show up differently when I am out in public, when I am externally living out my values. I'm going to be in alignment, not with whiteness, but with humanity. And that's a constant calibration, right? That's not blanket. Obviously, there's layers to that, which is why you should holler at me, and we can go deeper into this. We can hook up with community, with other white folks who are trying to do this work. Definitely get at me. But it's really important that we talk about that. And so I want to close this out by coming back full circle. I think the language that we need to talk about is that whiteness is an advantage in this system. Within white supremacy, it is advantageous to be white. But that doesn't make it that's not an elevated position. This system is not something that we should really be looking at as the pinnacle of health and human decency and humanity. It's not that, right? And so we have to be really thinking about it in those ways that offer us the space to understand the work we need to do to be fully um to be ready to participate and be full stakeholders in this movement towards racial justice. Because as I said in some of my earlier videos, when we don't do that, we end up in saviorism and things like that. The TV behind me is telling me it's time to wrap up. That's how I keep from going off on tangents longer than the one I'm going on right now. I hope this clarifies some things. Would love to talk to y'all about it. Follow me on the gram. Send an email, info@lyricculturalcoaching.com. Check out the website. Holla at us there. Peace and love, my people. Thanks for joining me again. Till next week.